Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first panel discussion of the Austin Percussion Festival 2020. I am so excited to be joined by a great group of folks today. We're going to be talking about writing for percussion, performing your own compositions, and how to get started in that process. I'd like to welcome my first guest. He's joining us from Perth, Western Australia. He is the host of the Studio YouTube channel, where he runs a great community of people, a Discord server, does all sorts of engagement, reviews, wonderful content. Please welcome Adam Tan.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Adam.
This is so cool. Thank you.
Our next guest is calling in from Ithaca, New York. She is a recipient of the 2019 Foundation for Contemporary Arts Grants to Artists Award and the 2016 New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship in Music and Sound. She is currently a visiting professor in electronic music at Bard College. Please welcome Sarah Hennies. Welcome, Sarah. And last but not least, our final guest this evening is joining us from Austin, Texas. He was named a music ambassador by the U.S. State Department and has shared his music with audiences around the world. His music has been widely performed by students and professionals alike, and has appeared on concerts in more than 25 countries. He's a multi-award-winning recipient of the PAS International Composition Contest and was recently the featured composer on NPR's Performance Today. Please welcome Ivan Trevino.
For having me.
Thank you for joining us, Ivan. Well, everybody, I can't say just how happy I am to speak with all three of you. I am super big fan of all of your work, all of your music, and I'm really looking forward to just learning more about your history and your writing process today. So I just kind of want to kick things off with a really general question. For a lot of us, we start as performers first. Maybe in elementary, middle school, we pick up an instrument, we learn the ropes, and then it's not till later in life that some of us start writing music. I'm just curious, what was that first spark for each of you? What made you go, you know what, I kind of want to create my own sounds. I want to make my own music. Adam, I'd like to start with you on this. How did you get started writing?
Yeah, I really liked seeing how percussion especially is like a very obviously developing instrument. It's developing every day. I feel like there's new mediums, new forms, new players, new communities every day. And I feel like writing music just comes naturally from that because we like to experiment as an instrument group. I'm sure Ivan would say the same thing as well. Like this is just it's a really great time for percussion, especially with like YouTube and all this stuff, but self-publishing on Spotify and all this kind of stuff. So I really want to try putting my own voice in my music while still learning how to play the instrument. And after I started doing it a lot more, I just felt like it was a really authentic way of expressing myself. And that's why I kind of encourage all my viewers to do the same thing, like try and write a few short licks here and there, see how you feel. And sometimes they come up with amazing stuff that sounds like nothing I've heard before. So I think that's one of the best things about writing music.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Sarah, how about you? What was the spark that got you interested in writing?
I don't know. It just was something that it didn't even occur to me that I wouldn't do that. I think partially because my entrance into challenging music was through indie rock and not punk bands, like punk as in like the Sex Pistols or something, but punk broadly defined, of playing in bands as a teenager. And I've been making my own, strange music since I was 15 and I'm 41 now. So it's just something I just have always wanted to create my own music. And around age 16 or 17, I started to get deeply into, more like modern contemporary music, and also more and more into playing, for lack of a better word, classical percussion. And eventually that was the path that I went down, was to be, instead of I don't know what you would call what I was doing in high school, making weird sound collages and stuff, but to being a composer that wanted to write for myself and also for other people. So it's just something that it really had never occurred to me that I would not do that. It's just been a part of my practice since I was a kid.
It's really interesting. Ivan, did you have a similar experience? Was it just kind of a very natural thing from the beginning, or was it something that came a little later in your percussion life?
No, I mean, even before I started playing percussion, I was playing drum set and guitar. And my dad had a band and he was a songwriter. So, like Sarah, like it just made sense to create your own music, especially in sort of non-classical idioms. That's what you do as part of being in bands and being a songwriter, for example. So I started songwriting really young. And then when I started doing percussion, it just sort of made sense to take some of the songwriting things that I was doing, my experience in sort of that genre, and just apply it to what I was doing with percussion. So yeah, I think like everyone here, it felt really natural to do. And like Adam said, our world features that a ton compared to other instruments, and I'm so happy to see people embracing that. And I think it's important to, if you're a musician, I think it's nice, even if one piece on a program is yours and you can talk about it and share with the audience what it's about. I feel like a connection with the audience can be that much stronger if you're presenting your own music, even if it's just one thing.
Yeah, I like that sentiment that you have that stronger connection when you're presenting something that you yourself created. So I actually want to talk a little bit about some of the music that you've each created. We have a clip from each of you of one of your compositions. Adam, I'd like to start with your clip. Can you talk a little bit about the piece that we're going to be watching?
Yeah, this clip is from it's my piece called Hope. It's a 4 1/3 octave 4 1/3 octave marimba solo that I wrote to reflect on the idea of looking forward to better days in this year, especially. And I guess this piece is really simple. I really, like some people always say, and you always write really slow music. When are you going to write something fast? And I'm like, well, I don't know if that's me. So like, I like to write sometimes, just I prefer to write authentically rather than to what the medium dictates, if you know what I mean. So this piece is a very spacious piece. It's more about voicing, and I always write my pieces from the top down. So like always melody first, and then I sort of harmonize and then try to join that together. Because I think one of the reasons why I like a lot of well-known percussion pieces from other people is because I remember the theme really well. So this piece is basically, it's supposed to help players develop that voicing idea. And when I see other people playing this piece, they put their own interpretation of the lines and the articulation, and I'm like, whoa, you can do so much with this. It's like a blank canvas. Yeah, that's what the piece is.
All right, next I'd like to hear from Sarah about the clip we're going to be watching of your piece.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. It involves a lot of explanation to like explain what you're about to see, but it's a piece called Passing that I conceived of a year or two ago that I intended to eventually, in the end, be about a 45-minute or 1 hour film. And so a couple of years ago, I wrote a piece called Passing for 8 woodwind instruments that I knew that I intended to be the soundtrack of what would eventually be this film, although that piece was performed a couple times on its own. But the piece is based on an artist named Mark Hogenkamp, who was the subject of a documentary called Marwin Call about maybe 10 years ago. And I don't want to get too deeply into that story right now because it just takes too long to explain. But in brief, Mark Hogenkamp became an artist because he was in a bar one night and in the early 2000s and was quite drunk and confessed to these younger guys that he was obsessed with high heels and had like a collection of like dozens and dozens of high heel shoes. And so when he left the bar, these guys followed him out of the bar and like beat him nearly to death. And so I wanted to make a piece that used that as kind of a jumping off point, and it uses this toy that I found in Portland, Oregon that I wanted to use because the way that Mark Hogenkamp was discovered as an artist is because one of the therapies that he created for himself, which is also why he became an artist, was that he was pulling this kind of big toy military truck down the road because he found that if he could pull this truck in line with the white stripe on the side of the road, then that was like helping him improve his motor skills. And he became discovered as an artist because this photographer who was in the art world in New York kept seeing this guy walk up and down the road, and finally one day stopped him and was like, "What are you doing?" And the rest is history. And so I wanted to make a piece that was not about him specifically, but inspired by this idea of like what it's like to not be able to walk down the road without somebody being like, "What's your deal?"
Thanks so much for that, Sarah. And let's kick it over to Ivan. Can you talk a little bit about the clip that we'll be watching of yours?
This piece is called Crossroads, and it's a piece that I wrote for a percussionist named Bryce Turner, who is a close friend of mine and also from Victoria, Texas, where I was born. And Victoria is known as the sort of the crossroads of South Texas, so I thought just that title would be nice. But also, the piece is sort of an intersection between my sort of sound worlds, marimba, and like drum set. And it's not orchestrated for drum set. I play cajon just for logistical purposes, really. But I think it really features a nice blend of my drum set background, really intricate sort of rhythms, almost always in certain sections in unison with the marimba, which make it really challenging for Bryce to play. And I did that intentionally. And I think as a composer, sometimes when a performer asks us to write them a piece, or they commission us to write them a piece, I oftentimes think about the qualities of their playing that I want featured when it gets performed, because I feel like if I think about it that way, I know that their sort of musical personality will come through the most. And I really wanted to feature like some really difficult marimba writing because I knew Bryce could handle it, and I think he did a great job. And this is, I don't know, it's one of, I think for me, like when I perform this piece, it's one of the funner pieces I think that I've written that I've been able to play, just because of the unison back and forth with the other player. I think there's like this connection that has to happen for this piece to be executed in sort of a meaningful and together sort of way.
Thanks so much for that clip, Ivan. So something I really admire about each of you is that you have a really distinct compositional voice. I hear one of your pieces and I know immediately it's something that you created. It feels really honest. And I'm just curious how you started to develop that voice. Like, was there a lot of trial and error? Are there things that you wrote early on that you look back at now and like, what was I doing with that? Or did ideas come more naturally to you through your different inspirations and experiences? I'd like to start with Ivan for this one.
Sure. Well, I think for me, part of it was recognizing that I was sort of segregating my musical interests initially when I was starting classical percussion. Like I was just doing that. And then when I would get in the car or when I would go to shows, I was listening to like, you know, normal people music. And I think I realized that for me to be an honest musician, I had to be honest about the kind of music that I wanted to create, even if it was on quote unquote classical percussion instruments. So I think I opened myself up to incorporating parts of the genres that I love so much outside of classical music into my sort of classical compositions. And I think in doing so, that helped me sort of have a sound that was distinct to me and honest, like Adam was saying. I hope that when people hear my music, that's, you know, one of the things that people say is that sounds like Ivan, or that sounds like it's coming from a really honest place, you know, because I think it is. So yeah, I think that's how sort of my sound, you know, came to be.
How about for you, Adam? I mean, you also have such a distinct sound on mallet instruments, and it feels, you know, if Ivan is talking about his interest in pop and rock music, just from the outside, I hear such an influence of classical music in your writing. Maybe piano compositions and things like that. Is that something intentional? Is that have anything to do with your background? What really inspired you?
It does have something to do with my background. I actually learned piano since when I was 4 years old, and I learned it for about 10 years. Doing classical piano, my favorite music was like Chopin, nocturnes, and played a bit of Gershwin, and it was really interesting, like going to marimba, because marimba, when I entered in mid-2000s, it was still like a very contemporary instrument. A lot of the pieces people play, I mean, even today, you don't get as many transcriptions, although it is starting to become more common for people to transcribe Western art music and stuff like that. But I found the similarities like were pretty close. Actually, I was thinking, oh, the voicings are quite similar, and you can do like pianistic style. So that was part of it, my piano education. And also another part of it was I really liked listening to, I still do, anime music, J-pop, K-pop, C-pop, all this like Asian music. And they're all very like pianistic in their style. They have a very, I learned a lot about harmony through listening to this kind of music, like anime soundtracks and stuff like that, because they have a specific way of writing it. And I just that really identified with me because I watched a lot of shows, and I've been doing that for so many years. And to put it on marimba, it just feels like a real luxury almost, because I think, like Ivan was saying, you like compose pieces that maybe are simpler. People will go, oh, that's not real music. Oh, that's not a real piece. I don't know why you're getting commissioned to write something in C major. And it's like, who cares? Music is whatever the person defines it to be. I know I'm getting quite passionate about it, but the point is, basically, like, I think it's a lot more fun in percussion that we can write things that not only we can identify with, but also other people can associate their own memories with. I think some people said that my pieces sounded like Debussy. Some people said my pieces sounded like Sword Art Online or whatever. And I was like, well, great. I think that is awesome. That's how I got my voice.
So Adam, Ivan, you're pointing to some pretty different influences here. Sarah, how about you? What kind of inspired you to start creating? I know you said it was kind of natural from the beginning. You couldn't imagine not writing music, but what were the early inspirations?
I don't know. I think that I knew from somewhat of a young age, like in college, that I wanted to craft like a voice that was mine. And I spent a lot of years that I had a big break from experimental music when I was playing in a band in Austin, like a kind of weird rock band for about 10 years. And in the middle of that 10-year period, I came back to composing, which happened through playing solo pieces of my own. And it was when I made a particular group of pieces around 2009, I had been making stuff that like, I was consciously like, I'm trying to figure out what the thing is that I need to do that is like mine. And when I made these pieces called Psalms, like when I made them, it was like, bang. Like I was like, oh, this is it. And now like everything I've been doing in the last 10 years, I have pieces that I wrote in like 1998 that I can look back at and be like, oh, the seeds of this were already existed when I was, 20 years old. It took some time for me to, I feel like the way that I, crafted my voice was really about like figuring out how to articulate what's unique about me specifically. And there was a big shift in how I wrote music when I realized that like, instead of asking myself like, what do I want to do? Or like, today I shall write a string quartet, that instead I asked like, what is it that I would do if I just was like left to my own devices and could do whatever I want? What's the thing that I'm naturally drawn to? And once I figured that out, it like opened my whole world up. But that's what I mean about like articulating the self, is that there's like something about me specifically that made me make that music. And so for me, it was figuring out really, this sounds a little bit like a self-help thing, but it was really about like figuring out who I am that led me to like crafting the thing that I do now that I feel like is really uniquely mine.
I'll gladly take that bit of self-help advice. I love like all three of you. It seems like it really came down to just being honest with what you were interested in. And in different ways, that manifested for each of you, but it seems like there was something outside of maybe your original classical percussion training that really you were attracted to. And then as soon as you started diving into that and seeing how that fit together with your percussion playing, it really started to soar. So I'm kind of curious about how then this process of writing and turning to your own inspirations goes hand in hand with the process of performing these pieces, because each of you also really actively play your own music. I'd like to start with you, Sarah, on this one. How do you feel like playing a piece relates to writing? Do the two processes help each other? Are they at odds with each other?
At first, like when I made those pieces I just mentioned a minute ago, the Psalms, like those pieces, they didn't even have scores for several years. I only made scores because people started asking about playing them, but they were made entirely from me playing them. And they became like finished structured pieces after I played them live several times. And so they came about at first of me just like improvising within a really limited kind of set of criteria, and eventually became finished pieces just because I played them live a bunch of times. And so I have a lot of, I have an inordinate amount of solo percussion pieces because for several years, I was advised a long time ago by Stuart Saunders Smith to write the piece that you can get played. And so, I have a lot of solo percussion pieces because I knew that I could get them played because I could play them. For me, like performing and composing it's impossible for me to like separate them, even though I am writing quite a lot for other people now, which is, at this point, it's not really like new anymore, but it's just a different kind of experience. But I have several pieces that were that were created that way. Of like, I just had a show to play and I thought, well, I'll try this new thing and see what happens. And then I got, 3 or 4 solo pieces that ended up being things that I played quite a lot for, a few years that became really personally important to me just because like I had a weird idea that I tried at a show one day.
Yeah, it seems like it's really kind of one and the same. I like what you said, how your pieces, they weren't really finished until you had already played them several times. Ivan, have you had a similar experience with your pieces, or do you find that you more kind of figure them out ahead of time and then it's fixed?
No, I think each piece is different. There's some pieces that I've definitely workshopped through my own concerts before ever putting it out for anyone else. And there's other times where it happens really quickly, and sitting at the piano or singing or whatever, and I can I can think about how this is going to go, and I can just have it done, just in that moment on the piano or whatever instrument I might be thinking about, and not necessarily complete, but just sort of conceptualized, But I will say that whenever I'm, what's interesting about being a performer and playing your own music is I do think about how I would play it, and I make sure to adjust whatever compositional things are happening, even if it's just like the slightest thing, to allow me an easier time whenever I'm going to play this piece, especially if I'm going to play it on the road and I don't get a lot of rehearsal time, and I wish I practiced more these days. So that does come to mind a little bit. I want to make sure that it's approachable for me personally when I get on the road and play these pieces, but also for other people as well. I'm just thinking about how it lays a little bit, and I think that's a good thing. There's different schools of thought about that whole concept of composing for the music or composing for the player, but I do think about that, and I think it's a good thing for me personally.
So Adam, I'm curious for you, a lot of what you do is create pieces of music and then put recordings of them online for your channel. And something that kind of comes with that is this inherent community of feedback, right? You've kind of cultivated a really great environment where you have people that are really excited to talk about not just your music, but percussion in general. Recently, it was actually a student of mine turned me onto it. I learned that you literally have a Discord server where people just like hang out and talk about percussion music, which I think is incredible. And I will definitely be hanging out in there a lot more. So I'm curious, do you feel like having this kind of community of people that you're interacting with, does that impact your composition process? Or is it still more like a singular process and then you just share?
That's a good point, actually. I mean, I have two types of pieces that I write. One is ones that I write for my own personal development that don't get released. I always tell people on the Discord that I have like, a few hundred draft pieces, like ones that I wanted to get out, but I felt like maybe it's not suitable for the target audience, or maybe it doesn't feel like I can finish it and feel happy with presenting it. And then I have the other pile of pieces, the ones that I have published, that I think are a good balance between what I want and what I think my audience would be happy to play as well. Because like Sarah was saying, you want to write stuff that other people will play too. And I think, like, for example, a lot of my pieces are 4 1/3 octave marimba solos, not 5 octave, because not everyone can afford a 5 octave. And I really like that Ivan was writing shorter pieces recently, and he also wrote like a 2 mallet solo, which a collection of 2 mallet solos. I think that's so cool. Like, that's exactly what I think people want to see. It's just music that they feel that they can play. It's kind of like, the idea of equal representation, right? It's like when you see an organization and you don't necessarily identify with them, you don't feel like you can connect with them as easily. But if you feel like there are things that you can identify with, like when you have like a diverse organization somewhere, it's like, oh, that's so good. So it's the same with my music. Like I try to make it approachable for my audience while still retaining my voice. And I like hearing their suggestions. Sometimes they say, oh, Adam, you should make like an easier piece because this is too hard for me. And, hard is relative. Like some people think we should all be, marimba guns, and we should, I think Ivan and I had a conversation about this 2 years ago where we're talking about like, we don't want to necessarily be like chop monsters. Like we want to just play, right? And like, it's the same with my pieces. Like I don't expect people to use them as big flexes or anything like that. I think if they feel like they're comfortable to use it for a flex, that would be great. But I know a lot of people use them as, breaks in their recital, short openers, that sort of thing. I'm really happy with that as well. So it's nice to have that community. Of course, by the way, you're all welcome to join if you want to join that Discord. It's a really fun place. I really didn't expect the Discord to go off that much, but it's really nice to just have a safe place for people to talk. We have people of like all ages. There's no, like, oh, I'm so much better than you sort of thing. So all of you welcome, of course.
That's really great. I love what you said, that you have so many pieces that you're just kind of like, this is not going to be what I was hoping for. And you kind of are not afraid to leave it behind. I know for myself, sometimes I get fixated on making something work, and that skill of saying, all right, let's just move on. Let's leave this in the drawer for now, I think is a really important skill, especially for young composers starting out. I want to talk more about, people first taking their first steps into composition, some thoughts and some advice for them. Ivan, I want to kind of go back to you real quick, because you actually recently published a book that's kind of targeted at that demographic. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about what that book is and what your goals are, and how you hope people use that, not just as a workbook, but as a jumping off point for their own compositional life.
Sure thing. And just to quickly, I think this is totally relevant. What Adam was saying about having a lot of different pieces or different ideas that never get released, I think perhaps a younger audience might see the pieces that Sarah or Adam or myself put out and think that we create only music like that. And that's not the case. I feel like there's many things that I've created that will never see the light of day. And most of the things that I create, I think probably, won't reach people. And I think what that demonstrates is this is just a process of figuring out your sound and figuring out how to make each piece what you want it to be. But I think there's a lot of younger composers who maybe create a seed or an idea and they don't know what to do, and they'll keep going in circles, just like you were saying, Chris. But I always like to tell them that's not the only thing you'll ever create. You have thousands of seeds probably in you. So sometimes it's okay to let it go and to start fresh, and know that your identity as a creator is not attached to what you can do with that one thing, because there's many things that I can't figure out what to do with either. So anyway, I guess with that in mind, I created this it's sort of like a workbook. It's called Co-Write, and it's there's 15 musical seeds that I've created, and there's audio tracks for each seed, and there's also sort of musical terms and questions associated with each seed that can sort of just be a point of I don't know, just a starting place for people who maybe aren't used to creating and aren't comfortable with it, to give them a little thing for them to just explore and to see what they can do with and maybe make their own. And that's the whole point of Co-Write, I think. And just to piggyback off of what we were saying earlier, playing in bands, sometimes you co-write with your bandmates. And that experience is really valuable. And that's something that doesn't really happen in the classical community. So in a way, I was also thinking about it from that perspective, like, you know, creating these little seeds, but approaching them as if we might be collaborating together, or maybe we're in a band together, you know. So that's sort of what my thought process was. And it's just, you know, in hopes that people will create more, or at least try to, because I think it's important to just take that first step.
Yeah, I think that's really wonderful, and I love the idea that it is just about taking that first step. I know for a lot of folks, myself included, the idea of a blank page is so intimidating. The idea of having an endless world of possibilities and not knowing where to start. So I think it's really interesting having that kind of starting point for you to go off of. I kind of want to talk about starting points in composition, maybe in a slightly different way. Sarah, I remember years ago, this was one of the first times I met you. I was coming to one of your concerts, and you had asked for some help just making some sounds in one of the pieces. And I remember showing up, like thinking I was going to get some music and rehearse. And you handed me a tin can, and you said, "I want you to make the sound of trying." And I was like, whoa, that's no joke, because you didn't write anything out, and you said just one sentence, but I had this incredibly vivid image in my mind of exactly what you wanted me to do. So I'm curious if starting points like that are important in your writing, these kind of more broad descriptors that start with very big brushstrokes and then become more detailed as you flesh them out.
Well, I was really inspired by Morton Feldman's Crippled Symmetry in the way that he wrote these 3 parts in a chamber piece, but none of them metrically match up. And there's no like written instructions for the piece, but the implication is that the piece starts and you just go, and the players are independent of one another. And, you know, having played that piece, the rehearsal process, really all it involves is making sure that the 3 musicians don't get so far apart from each other that the piece doesn't end, the 3 musicians don't kind of end too far apart from each other. Because in general, like, the flute finishes first, the piano second, and percussion last. Like, it's roughly, the parts are written that way. But the reason I mention it is because through this totally simple, unspoken thing of like, just play, and these parts don't match up, and don't worry about it, that it generates this level of complexity and unpredictability that Morton Feldman like never could have composed. Like he never could have written that piece in a way, note for note, what you would get just through this simple gesture of like, don't worry about the fact that this doesn't match up. And that was a really influential thing for me in this idea of like a really simple instruction generating not only complexity, but something that I couldn't have written myself. And so I really like, not like totally, like I don't want to have like no control over a piece, but it's really exciting for me to write a piece that like I provide a framework for, but I don't actually know like totally what's going to come out of it. And so, but I try to compose the framework in a way that something will not happen that I wouldn't like. And so that's something that not in every piece, you know, a lot of pieces are just fixed and the score is the score, but a lot of pieces are not like that. But even in the fixed pieces, this idea of generating complexity through like a really simple instruction is something that I really, really like doing a lot.
Sarah, I think you wrote some music for Matt Evans, right? And his group. Am I mistaken?
Yeah. That album just came out a few months ago,
Oh,
actually.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I was on your website and I was listening to the very first track on there. I think it was beautiful.
Yeah, that's the Beethoven piece.
Yeah, and it was awesome. And the way you're describing sort of creating music through these just broader sort of ideas, it reminds me of Matt too, because in a lot of ways his pieces are similar. And I think that connection that you have with him is so cool, and what he's doing, obviously in Brooklyn, is amazing. It was just cool to see that connection with you guys. And for anybody listening, go listen to that record.
Well, that piece is really funny. The album's called Spectral Mouse God Cities, and I wrote this and this is not something that I usually do, but I wrote this like highly polyrhythmic contrapuntal music between the three parts in a way that like the three players are all playing in different divisions of the beat on every beat for like, I don't know, 10 minutes or something. And the first page of the music has this, there's a repeat sign around the whole first page. And at the end, I don't remember the number, but it says repeat something like 20 times. And in my mind, this is an example of exactly what I was just talking about, that in my mind, in 20 repeats of difficult polyrhythmic contrapuntal music between three people where there's no clear pulse, that there's bound to be mistakes, that in my mind, that like definitely that music would fall apart and come back together in a way that I could not have composed. But then those guys are so good that they just played it. And now I like the perfect version way more than I would have liked the like mistake version piece.
That's awesome. Sorry, Chris. I just had to share that.
I love it. So we've talked a lot about different ways we could kind of take our first steps into composing, starting from these broad ideas like Sarah, you were talking about, Ivan, you talked about a musical seed. Adam, you talked a lot about being honest with the music that inspires you. And we kind of live in an age where there's tons of percussion music being created. So I kind of want to close with just one last question for each of you. If I'm a percussionist and I've never written for myself or for others before, why should I? Why is composition something I should try my hand at? And if I do want to take a swing at it, do you have any advice for me as this new composer? Adam, I'd like to start with you on this.
Okay. Well, I think, the idea of some people take composition very seriously. They're like, oh, you must study composition to be a composer. And it's like, well, we don't have 48 hours in a day. Sorry, man. But a lot of people say, oh, you didn't even study composition. You're not a real composer. What exactly is a real composer? Like some of the most memorable pieces, I think, were written by people that are not composition students. So whenever people think of studying, I always say, don't worry about like having this sort of formalized structure to your composition, right? You start with a basic idea. Maybe it's just three or four notes, and then you start to join it to a few other notes, and you think, oh, why does it join? Why do I like that sound? Why do I like how that sound interacts with that sound? And then you start to write phrases, and you don't necessarily have to write them even. You could just, I think Ivan was saying in a workshop that I saw that he did, that he uses, voice memos on his phone to just record. Still doing that? yeah, me too, right? It's just like, that's just so simple. Nowadays you can just record short clips and just keep them in your repertoire. And then if you decide to take it more seriously, you can always go back to those short clips, join them together a bit more, that sort of thing. Oh, yes, this is a very big flex, everybody. Look at that. Voice memos,
it goes back to 2012. So that's a lot of memos.
You're a massive body of work.
History. That's like all of Bach's work in a phone right there.
No. It's like some of it's just 5 seconds of me like singing in falsetto that no one would ever comprehend. But that's okay.
Beautiful. Well, I'd pay to have an album of those short clips, just 30 of them in a row. But yeah. But I really think it's much more about just just getting started. And you know, I've seen on the Discord, we have a composition talk channel on the Discord, and some of the stuff people come up with is insane. And they've just started. They said, look at this thing that I just made in Sibelius like 10 minutes ago. I'm like, whoa, you don't even do composition. Where did this come from? And I also find, actually, this is also the other thing that I was going to say, is that when you do composition enough, or when you start to think about writing your own music, you start to be better at other people's music too. You start to be better at performing, you know, other people's pieces, because you understand like music language, you understand the relationships of that composer's voice. Like, why did they write, you know, this particular line this way? Because that's their style. And you actually just become a better musician all around. It's just like practicing like your technique and stuff. I just think it's a very, very important thing to just give it a go. You don't have to take it too seriously. No one's going to judge you and say, oh, your composition is terrible. If they do, well, take them out. Take them out of your life. Just and yeah, like, see, we're so casual about like voice memos, man. Like, that's not even, we're not even real composers. Like, what is that? But yeah, just do it. Just start.
So Sarah, what about for you? Why do you think it's important that percussionists start to engage in composing, and what can someone do to take that first jump?
I'll quote Herbert Brun, who taught a seminar when I was an undergrad that was very, very important to me. And this does not apply specifically to percussionists, but Herbert talked a lot about information theory and about when a system is created, from the moment something is created, it's dying. And, you know, this idea of like the moment we're born, we're dying. And Herbert would always say that the reason to compose music is because I like music. And so by composing, that means that music stays around a little longer. And so every like new idea in music means that you're in some small way extending the life of music. And so, you know, I would never discourage anyone from like not writing music if that's something that they want to do, because you know, what's better than like making something that you feel really close to that other people get to hear. For, you know, for me, like that's like a, you know, never stops being thrilling for me.
Yeah, I think that's a really wonderful outlook. Just, we love music, so just contribute to it, help it stick around.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, why would you not do that? Like, I can't, like, I don't know, I can't imagine not doing it.
And Ivan, I want to wrap things up with you. Why do you think it's important for percussionists to engage in writing and create their own music?
Well, there's a lot of schools of thought about music being a language, you know. And one of my professors in college talked to me about this once. And he said, you know, if music's really a language, we should be able to do more than just read it. We should be able to improvise in it and speak it and write it and theorize it. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I feel like what Adam said, when you create music, it informs how you approach other music. And it even informs how you approach your audience, you know, which I think is really important. So yeah, I think it makes us well-rounded musicians and well-rounded people. And it really makes us creatives. You know, a lot of people think of musicians as being creative people. But oftentimes, especially in classical music, it's sometimes not creative, you know, sometimes it's very technical. So the compositional process allows us to really explore our creativity. And I think it's really important. And also, I think what's interesting about this panel is we all create different kinds of music. And I think it's important for us to be honest with ourselves as creators and not to create something because we think somebody will like it. You know, I always say, like, create the music that you want, whether it's totally accessible or totally weird, and then figure out what to do from there. But I think our sort of inner self should dictate that. And I think that makes our whole musical community that much more diverse, and that much more interesting. And that quote, Sarah, was like spot on too. That's really, really wonderful. So yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank you all so much for hanging out tonight. This has been really great. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience really enjoyed this. Adam, Sarah, Ivan, thank you again for your time and for your music. I really look forward to hearing more from all three of you. For those of you at home, if you'd like to learn more about any of these composers, please check the description down below. There'll be links to their pages and some more recordings of their music. I guess until next time, I'll see you all soon. Thanks so much for joining me.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.